obviously you look at the Supreme Court right now, and they're like redacting of Roe v. Wade, sending us 100 years into the past for no particular reason. I want to write an article like I think we're living in a time that should be reimagining what justice means. And I think Sapolsky's on the front line of that.
I hear you. I think they have a very small and narrow philosophical debate, but they have a very large political debate. They disagree about inequality in society, and then one becomes like a proxy for the other. But like, it's not so clear that that it's actually a good proxy for the other.
And in both cases, you ignore the fact that I reject the view that you quote. So I forgive you for that because you're not responsible. You couldn't help it. It was the various imbalances in your brain that led you to misunderstand the quote about the marathon. If you'd read the rest of the sentence, but I guess you hadn't have enough self-control to do that. But if you had, you would have realized that you were misquoting me. So, but since you don't have responsibility, I don't blame you. I'm a little sorry. I'm a little disappointed that you don't take responsibility for these errors. I try to take responsibility for my errors, and
I'm talking to my friend Jonah Andrist. He is an author. He's a podcaster. Find some links to his stuff down below. It's been a little while since we spoke. Jonah, it's great to see you again. It's great to
Nice.
talk to you again.
Me too, man.
I would love to talk with you about this Sapolsky Dennett debate
Yeah.
on free will. Do you have any background with either Sapolsky or Dennett?
Yes, I read, well, the first book of Dennett's I read was The Mind's Eye, which he co-wrote with Douglas Hofstadter. It was published in the 90s, I think, but I read that as a fresh-faced 20-something, and uh, I don't remember anything particular about it. It's kind of like after you've read so many books, my friend in the podcast always talks about this, it's just kind of like a feeling. It's kind of like a vibe you get from it.
Sure,
Um,
that's fine.
But then his other book that he wrote, Intuition Pumps and Other Tools for Thinking, is maybe the best book, intro to philosophy, kind of logic course I've ever read. So yeah, Dennett's amazing. I'm mostly familiar with Sapolsky with this. Like his argument on free will here is the thing I've most familiar with. He had this whole well, I'm not sure I want to get into that. He had a lecture on depression. Last time we talked about depression, and he has a whole lecture on depression that I'm sure kind of, I think kind of misses the mark in a couple places, but that's neither here nor there. How about you?
Yeah, so similar. I read The Mind's Eye when I was in my early 20s. I came to it probably mostly through Hofstadter because I was a big fan of his, Gödel, Escher, Bach,
Yeah.
and then Metamagical Themas, or Math, I think that's what it was called. I have all those books. Yeah, I have all those books in my house. And then Dennett, I loved also around my 20s. I loved Consciousness Explained. At the time, the book annoyed me because as I felt, as I think a lot of people felt, that it didn't really explain consciousness. But as the years went on and I reflected and revisited parts of the book, I felt like it was a very brilliant book, actually. I thought Dennett has a real knack for explanation, for analogy. Like he opens, with a whole long section about phenomenology and which is to say like experience of qualia, of conscious experience. And I think it's brilliant. I think it's beautiful. I think he wrote really well. Um,
Except he
and
doesn't think qualia exists, right? That's like his.
yeah, sort of like it's yeah, that's the paradox of the book. Yes, he gets to this conclusion. He's like that he thinks consciousness is ultimately not real. So that which it would be to say what you were saying, that qualia doesn't exist. But paradoxically, the whole book opens with a beautiful investigation of qualia, where you are left feeling like qualia definitely exists. So it's a paradoxical book, but I felt like he was brilliant in that respect, just in terms of his capacities of explaining an analogy and things like that. Um, Sapolsky, I know from his lectures online. You mentioned a lecture of his. He does behavioral psychology stuff online, I think,
Yeah.
at Stanford, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
He's a great lecturer. And I actually, in preparation for this, audio booked half of his book Determined. Um, which was interesting. And then of course there's this debate. So that's my background. So I guess it's sort of similar.
How does determined compare to what he's been putting online, just in his spoken word stuff? Like how?
Yeah. It's I feel like it's hard for me to review the book because I only have half of it under me.
Right.
And so, but I would say this, to be honest, the first half did not make me want to read the second half.
Okay.
I think it's, if I don't know, if you're into the minutia of hormones and all the different biological and cultural social ways in which our behavior is determined in like a very, I don't know, like meticulous kind of way that seems pretty tedious to me after a while, then that's the vibe I got. But maybe the second half is different. So it's hard for me to judge.
Okay. Yeah. Well, and I think and I don't know, you don't really need all the details for his argument. You don't need all the
Exactly. That was the big problem that I had with it, as I don't understand. Like, I think that's a paradox of Sapolsky and a paradox of the book, is that like there's two things going on. There's a philosophical argument. I feel like I'm sort of just jumping. I cut you off, and I'm like jumping on what you're saying because I agree with it so much.
Please,
So I apologize for cutting you off. But you're right. Is the philosophical argument doesn't require any of this apparatus, but it's like he really wants to get into the apparatus. Like he really wants to talk about genes and culture and like hormones. Like that's really what he wants to talk about,
Yeah. Which is, I mean, that is the backbone of his apparatus, of course. So, but basically he says, okay, so Dennett, you're comfortable with these edge cases, right? You're comfortable with the person who has a brain trauma and then that affecting their life, and we have to treat them differently. But he's saying you just have to treat everyone with that same deference. It's just much harder to detect. It's a lot easier to detect in someone who has a traumatic brain injury, but everyone has that to some extent. It's just under so many layers deep, you can't tell.
Dan's is an agenda, God help me for saying a word this verboten these days, but of a liberal, which is to say it's important to remember the edge cases. Brain damage, okay, keep in mind they're a special case, that sort of thing. But for everybody else, we have a realm in which responsibility makes sense. And I would characterize where I'm coming from as far, far more radical. What we see when somebody has brain damage is an easy task for us. We can see the thing that robbed them of responsibility. But when we look at everybody else, we have the far harder task of we need to see thousands and thousands of spider web thick cables of the influences that started from the beginning of life until 1 second ago. And it's a hell of a lot harder to see that. And science has made less progress with that. And it's a whole lot easier to look at that complicated scenario and say, this one is not an exception. This is one where we can hold them responsible. That's the limits of what science have told us constitute edge cases. There are no edge cases. There's just ones where the causality is easier to see because it was mostly from one sledgehammer of an influence rather than a gazillion. But it's the same threads that ultimately bind us.
Okay, let's take a step back. What were your thoughts on the debate? Did you enjoy it? How do you think it went? Who do you like? What position is most aligned with you, would you say, in the Sapolsky Dennett debate?
I watched it twice, and Sapolsky's his counter argument, I feel like is his second. So they break it up into sections. They both get 10 minutes at the beginning, and then a 10-minute rebuttal after the first guy has had his opening statement. And Sapolsky's rebuttal after Dennett's first speaking time, I think, is just so powerful. And and at the core, they end up just talking about, like, they talk around it, but I think at the core, it's really a conversation about morality and justice, and like how we're supposed to think about punishing people, and how justice actually serves a society. And I think they're much more in agreement than they think they are. It's kind of like the Freudian narcissism of small differences kind of thing. But the first time I watched it, Dennett just seemed on the defensive to me. Like that was just like the kind of feeling I had watching him, is like he's kind of not willing to give Sapolsky his due for the arguments he's making. And I'm guessing that's just because he spent his whole life in academia and he's had this conversation so many times that like arguing with a determinist is kind of verboten to him. You know, he's just he's like, no, but you're not understanding my side. But I don't think he's understanding that Sapolsky is coming at it from this sideways, non-philosophical way of thinking about it. And Dennett really wants it to be pure philosophy, which it isn't. It isn't, right? Like it's mostly biology. The philosophy is just what we're putting on top of it, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with a lot of that for sure. One of my takeaways, I felt like the debate was a mess in a lot of ways for some of the reasons that you pointed out, like Dennett being super defensive. For the sense, I got a strong sense they didn't understand each other. I got an even stronger sense, and I think there would be no debate about this if you asked the moderator himself. I think the moderator had no idea what was happening in the debate. I think the moderator explicitly implied he was very confused, and which is to say, it was a confusing debate for the audience.
Yeah.
And to highlight how the sort of the layers of absurdity here, in my opinion, this is my claiming that I it felt absurd to me.
Okay.
The moderator opens with a poll, and the poll is determinism versus free will, and free will wins in the first poll.
Right.
And Dennett says, the poll, I disagree with your poll. I'm also a determinist. So like the initial poll made no sense.
Yeah.
It meant that a majority of the viewers do not agree with either Dennett or Sapolsky. And then
that's an interesting point. Yeah.
there was a 10-point swing to the determinism side at the end, which I think means the intuition that I felt was that like Sapolsky won the debate, so to speak. Like he came off, I think most people would say, sounding more convincing, which is probably explains that swing. But like again, the poll was still phrased wrong because they're both determinists. So it's like all up in the air. You know what I'm saying?
Well, Dennett is saying he's a compatibilist, which
Right.
is right. He believes in both determinism and free will
Exactly.
that exist, simultaneously. Yeah.
The results of the poll were 59% did believe in free will, 41% didn't. That's where we've started. For Robert, thank you. Dan, there's the challenge for you.
Yes. First of all, I would like to issue a little disclaimer about your poll. You asked whether you believe in determinism or free will. I believe in both determinism and free will.
I spent a lot of time working a lot harder to understand Dennett's point of view, because actually Sapolsky everything about it just makes sense to me, but not in a way that like makes me skeptical of myself. Like there's certain things that when they make sense, you have to ask yourself like, well, maybe I'm just like, that's my own bias. But like Sapolsky's arguments just like, it's not even intuitive. It's well, anyway. So it seems to Dennett, right, that they're both arguing for this version of control. But so I watched this video of Dennett explaining, okay, so when a boulder rolls down a hill, the boulder is determined because no matter what is in place, the objects, the gravity, the where we are around the sun, like when the boulder rolls down the hill, that's determined. But when a skier goes down the hill, that's not determined, right? Okay, and now you can make the counter argument, well, was the skier hungry? Was like what level of skier were they? Like what point of the day? How much fun were they having? Like, of course, like that will all influence the skier's motion, right? Whatever. But he's saying the control you have to adjust for is no matter what, they're going to get to the bottom of the hill. They are going to get to the bottom of the hill, right? Like if they're a practiced enough skier, they're going to do that. And the consistency of that is what abides for the free will. It's a little hard for me to parse, actually. So I was really trying to get it. It's like the control of yourself is what the free will is. And I think Sapolsky would argue that control of yourself is the illusion. And of course, they both accept that illusion to some extent, but Dennett just thinks that illusion is meaningful. I like, yeah. I have my own like completely tangential thoughts, but I'm trying to sum it up in the way I understand it. I don't know. How do you
Yeah.
understand?
No, I think that gets to the heart of like what happened, like of why it was so confusing, why the moderator was confused, why I'm sure the audience was confused, and why Dennett I think is struggling. I think to, I think I can make Dennett's argument for him. I think
Okay.
we can maybe get there. I don't think we're there yet. Like I think I can explain. I think I can explain what Dennett's getting at, but it's hard, and I'm not 100% sure I'm right. So like it requires like a lot of work to like try to, I think, make Dennett's case, because it feels either like so incomprehensible or like strange. Like it's like a very strange argument, this compatibilism. But like maybe let's take a step back. Let's just take a step back.
Okay.
If you ignore the case of compatibilism, let's ignore compatibilism as a category. So there's still like a free will determinism debate, right? We're sort of removing the middle case, which would be this compatibilist case. So there's still the two ends of the spectrum.
Yeah.
You don't have any instinct, any there's no appeal to you for a free will understanding of human beings?
Not really. No.
I think a
'Cause
lot of people do have that belief. So why don't you?
I well, I think because it's a belief, right? It's not because it's based on any thinking measure. Like it's just instinct. It's not,
But
it's not, yeah.
surely you feel like you have free will, right?
Insofar as I feel anything about myself, I guess. Like like I can't, like I don't have the freedom to just start my own farm right now, you know? Like there's a lot of cultural aspects that come into play, um, and limitations just from the natural environment, right? Like you ever watch those shows like Alone? It's like, no, you got to become in rhythm with nature. It's not about like you're always submitting yourself in some way or another to the general flow of things.
Mm.
So there's never anything totally purely you in anything.
I totally agree. 100% on board. But like I want to push it a little more. Like you're given a choice to move to place A or place B, to
Yeah.
accept offer A or offer B, eat A or eat B, set an alarm clock or not. Like in those isolated incidents, isn't there a strong intuition that most human beings have of like having a choice which is not determined?
Yeah, but of course, but Sapolsky would argue all of that is already built into your mechanism of like
Yeah.
all the things that got you to that point, right?
Yeah.
Every step beforehand, like determinism is a complete history, a complete history of all the molecules in your body going back to your initial conception. And like if you chase that logic all the way back, yeah, it all has some sense to it. I mean, maybe if you took out the word free, like if we were talking in a Nietzschean sense, like just the word will,
Mhm.
like do I feel like I have a will? Yeah, I guess I have to agree to that. Do I think it's free? No,
Mhm.
I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. So I again I agree. I'm not into free will. I don't believe in free will myself, but I do feel that for many people like that is a very strong impulse, like psychologically, philosophically, um, and yeah. So
Just
that's
don't
interesting.
think
So
they're
what
I
you
don't
say?
think they're thinking about it, right? Like I just don't think they've thought about it in depth. I don't know. Like it like isn't the whole idea of Sapolsky's argument like he has a steep hill to climb. Like he has, that's what makes his argument so compelling to me, is like he's got to convince people who do feel just on a basic fundamental level like they have free will, and he's got to say like, well, no, you don't. And like bumping up against that with other people is so difficult. It's so
Yeah.
challenging. Like that's what I really respect about it. Sorry.
Yeah, I hear that. And I think to me the best, like most compelling articulation of like or like demonstration of like how we don't have free will comes from Sam Harris. I think he does a really good job. And he'll say this on podcasts. I think he did this with Lex Friedman, but maybe in more than one context. He says like, think of a color. Okay, like what could be more free than like picking a color out of a hat? Just pick a color. And look closely at what goes on in your mind. And if you look closely, you'll see that like a color will just impose itself in your brain. Like red will just pop up or something. And you didn't choose that. Like there was no free choice in that. Like your brain just suggested it to you. And so I find that really compelling, that if you look closely, with the closer you look, the mystery of free will is seen to be like out of your control. Like your brain just does stuff, and then you take, oh, I came up with the color red, but no, you didn't. Your brain just like asserted it. You know what I'm saying? And I find that really compelling.
Yeah. And maybe there's something mystical, or we convince ourselves there's something mystical, because you said red, the color that popped into my head, red.
There you go. Yeah.
Like why was that? Like,
Yeah.
is it something about having this interaction over the computer? Like something like, like maybe we're being forced in some way to, I don't know, maybe it's a coincidence, probably just.
Yeah. So, okay, so that's one half of this. Now, so going back to Sapolsky and Dennett, because this is what we're here to talk about. Sapolsky and Dennett are both deterministic in the sense that they don't subscribe to any metaphysical conception of free will. There's no ghost in the machine, no spirit that's like the puppet master or something. They're on board with that, and as are we, you and me, apparently, given our conversation so far, which is good. To me, it's going to be so obvious, right? Do you play with artificial intelligence at all, like ChatGPT, that kind of thing?
Not really, no.
Okay, I do a lot. I'm a big fan. I interact with ChatGPT all the time. It's really good. It can already fool people online into thinking it's a person. And I think within a few years, we'll be like, obviously our brains are like these large language models, because large language models are going to be so advanced that we're not going to like recognize even like a difference. So if we assume that the large language models don't have free will, because why would they? They're just computer programs on silicon chips. It'll be obvious that we don't have free will for the same reason. So I think we're close to that being fairly obvious to people. Okay, and so now the question becomes, like what is Dennett doing, right? It's like that's like the next question. Like what is this compatibilism that Dennett is like trying to recover? Do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, I kind of like stealing Sapolsky's thoughts on Dennett, because I heard him on another podcast and he was like, the thing Dennett never truly grapples with is like he wants there to be, like he says, Dennett has a quote once of, well, if there is no free will, how do we know we deserve our prizes?
Right. Right.
Like, and I think that's a very big part of where it comes back into the moral justice argument of, like, how do you know when you've done a good job? How, like, if you do, I think Dennett feels compelled by some problem of like, if there isn't objective ways of valuing doing right or wrong things, even though he's an incredibly smart man, so he has to like understand it through this philosophical and deterministic way, he still bumps up against that thing of like, well, how else am I supposed to live with myself for being gifted with the things I'm gifted with? I think. I think it's kind of just a almost nearly an emotional reaction.
Here's my defense of Dennett.
Okay.
I think for Dennett, free will is like consciousness. Like, it's not real. Like, there's clearly no metaphysical ghost in the machine that's like the, dark Cartesian Descartes, like a spirit that communicates through the pituitary gland. It's like, all that's bullshit. That doesn't exist. But you could still talk about consciousness. You know what I'm saying? Like, that to me is the compatible. Like we still like claim we're conscious, like we still treat each other like we're conscious. Morality to a large extent is downstream of consciousness. Like an action is deemed immoral because it inflicts pain, which is like a state of consciousness. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So I think that's ultimately what Dennett is doing.
Yeah, I think you explained it better than I did. that was better.
But it's tough. He doesn't say that. I mean, I'm like Dennett might disagree with me. Like I didn't hear that from Dennett. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like Dennett doesn't say this. Like I'm trying my best to like help him out here. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not easy.
Because I think inevitably your argument then leads to, well, that's still not free will. That's just a trick we're putting on ourselves, right? Like that's like, and a trick isn't philosophy. It's not a truth, so to speak. It's just
Yeah.
a trick.
Or like an illusion, I
Yeah.
would say. Like kind of an illusion. And that's like what Sam Harris gets at. Like you think you chose the color, but it's an illusion because if you look closely, like your brain clearly did. Like clearly there was no free will involved. You know what I'm saying? And so I guess, yeah, so I think Dennett would agree. Like there's an illusion going on, but it's an illusion that has like ramifications. So one of Dennett, I think, strongest points, right? So again, I'm defending Dennett, and I'm not doing it in bad faith. I actually think that Dennett's argument is acceptable. Like I actually have no problem with Dennett's argument. I think Sapolsky and Dennett talked past each other. I don't think they understood each other. But
Yeah.
I think there's a version of Dennett which makes a lot of sense. I have no problem with. Dennett talks like a few times in the interview. I'll try to put in a clip where he's like, you know, like what about the people who say you can't blame me because I was determined. So like I did some awful action.
There's a quote that I love from the late great novelist and critic Tom Wolfe, who said the conclusion people out beyond the laboratory walls are drawing is the fix is in. We're all hardwired. That, and don't blame me, I'm wired wrong. Well, if you're wired wrong, I won't blame you. But what about being wired right? Not perfectly, but well enough to be held responsible and to hold yourself responsible.
And of course, Dennett's response is like, no, we live in a society where we treat people as having free will for the purposes of punishment, for the purposes of like deterring people, like for the, you know what I'm saying? Like
Yeah.
that makes sense, you know?
Yeah.
Like if a man does an awful crime and says, don't blame me, I have no free will, like obviously that doesn't work, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. But I think, Sapolsky also agrees that punishment has to exist. You know,
Right.
like there's no way of getting around it. It's what they say is like, well, in an ideal world, the person being punished thanks you. They're
Right.
like,
I like that.
Yeah.
Dennett said that.
Yeah.
That was Dennett's line. I thought that was a good point. And that as an
Yeah.
example of, I think Dennett and Sapolsky are actually very similar, as you said. I think Dennett and Sapolsky actually would probably agree on that.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah. Yeah. And it does come down to this weird sense of justice. And like, there's a thing Sapolsky brings up in almost every interview he's in, where he's like the hungry judge thing, where if a judge has had lunch and you're up for a parole hearing, you're like 75% more likely to get a lenient parole just after he's eaten. And it's just like hard data, like, and the writer Saul Bellow has one of my favorite quotes that everyone hates, but I love, is like, he says, I've met too many judges to believe in justice.
Mm-hmm.
And there's all, and obviously you look at the Supreme Court right now, and they're like redacting of Roe v. Wade, sending us 100 years into the past for no particular reason. I wanted to write an article like, I think we're living in a time that should be reimagining what justice means. And I think Sapolsky's on the front line of that, of taking another look at just justice in general. Like the argument, I was thinking about this last night, where there's, like you'll hear a right-wing dickhead say about millennials, like, oh, they all got participation trophies, like, oh, they're all coddled, they all got trophies. Well, that was only a half measure, right? Like the true measure of justice, I think, would be nobody gets a trophy. Like, yeah, you're all just as good as you were.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Congratulations. You get a pat on the back. That's it. Something along those lines. I don't know. That was just something I was thinking about. So
that sounds like an argument for, I think that sounds like something Dennett would say, right? Like Dennett would say, if we want to live in a world where like we can reward effort and give out trophies, then we're entertaining this illusion of free will. Like we're entertaining this illusion that like someone worked hard and won, you know what I'm saying? And like Sapolsky, Dennett's understanding of Sapolsky, which is probably not actually Sapolsky, Dennett's understanding of Sapolsky is like, you want to live in a world where no one can get a trophy because it's all determined and no one did anything. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, I think that's true. And I think that would be the full measure. Is like, yeah, nobody gets a trophy.
Mhm.
And I think specifically, this is the one thing I really wanted to talk to you about, or just kind of someone as intelligent as you, but
Aw,
you're
you're
here and you're great and you're very intelligent.
Aw.
You're the most intelligent person I've talked to on my computer,
Aw.
probably in my whole life. I don't know. Could be.
I doubt that, but that's okay. You don't have to flatter me. You're very sweet.
Well, why not? Might as well. It costs me nothing. It gives you a little sense of benefit, you know.
Okay.
But like, so Sapolsky opens up the argument with like, so I'm a writer, right? I'm a novelist. Like my entire identity after 20 was like reading these books and being like, okay, here's a novel. It gets into people's psychology. It gets into culture. We dive into someone's head. It sort of encompasses everything about being alive. But Sapolsky goes on this thing like with a movie, right? Like, if you're determined, when people, it's kind of like what reader response theory, how reader response theory has overtaken many college courses these days. Like, when you go in to see a movie, your hormone levels, how you were feeling, like how you were generally predisposed to engage with that movie is how you are going to experience the movie. And the person sitting right next to you might have a completely different experience, which is true, right? Like, you notice that you'll go to a movie and two different people have, like, I've reviewed movies many times, and there's some movies people love, which I think is bananas. Like I was talking to a guy at the video store who loves the movie Domino, and I'm like, what? But it's like, I want to live in their head. But the problem that comes down to for me with the determinism is, but there are movies that kind of just universally everyone loves, that kind of like hit on every level. So presumably, like, so how can that art cut through the determinism of the people? I think I'm overusing the word determinism, the biology of the people interacting with it. I can try and explain more, but maybe you got it.
Yeah, well, I think what I got for sure is that there's a deep question that gets to the heart of like, what makes great art? Is it objective or subjective? And right, what else? So like that I think is a big piece of what you're saying. But what other pieces are there? Do you think that's part of this question as well?
Well, I don't know. I guess that's why I've been struggling with it so much. Is like, well, obviously it can be both, but then if it is both, then I guess that makes me a compatibilist. But I don't think I'm a compatibilist because I technically agree with Sapolsky more, I think. I don't know.
There's also this question of like AI art, right? I feel like that's also part of this question of free will and determinism. Like if AI is generating art, like, or can AI ever generate something as beautiful as a Beethoven sonata or something, something like that, which is the question that philosophers have grappled with.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, what would that accomplish though? There is already there is already Beethoven. Like it's just redundant, or what's the word? Well, I'll leave it with redundant, but there's already Beethoven. So, well,
but can it make something new? Can it innovate? Like that's the question. Because of course AI, we say, and this, like, everyone agrees AI can like regurgitate and remix. But can AI have breakthroughs? Like that's the question. Is AI gonna like break new ground in art?
Well, you've read your Hofstadter, right?
Mm-hmm.
From my understanding of Hofstadter, he argues that you basically need a body, right? Like, creating consciousness and intelligence is so complex. Like, to think on that many levels deep, you almost need a working organism that has to account for all these different failure points and desires and whatever. Like to me, it's like, if you're gonna try and create a new artist, you might as well just have another kid, I guess, rather than try and make AI, because it's much more likely to come from a person than it is to come from AI.
That's funny.
that was my understanding of Hofstadter. It was kind of like it's so complex that you basically just have to. It's like the people who talk about simulation theory.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's like when you go out and walk and you look at the grass and you just look at the different dimensions of even like a tiny, you know, like that much grass, single blades of grass, and you think of how much computer power it would take to recreate an entire world with all this amount of flora and fauna and all this. Like, you might as well just make another Earth. Like, that's probably easier than making a simulation of it.
I hear you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's come back to this question of great art. Like, I'll share a problem, so to speak. For me, this is a philosophical issue, and you can respond to it. Okay, it's a fact that going back about 8 years ago in my life, 7 years ago, I was through a very intense noise phase, where one of my favorite genres of music was noise, and often like noise metal, and not to necessarily noise metal. But you know, like a name in this space like Merzbow. He's like a visionary in the noise music space. But then there's like heavier. I have a video on my channel, Pharmacon, and there are plenty of others. Now, for 99.9% of people, if you turn this on for them, they will like immediately cover their ears and say, "Turn that off. That is the most awful thing I've ever heard in my life." You know what I'm saying? So what happens now? So this is like a paradox because like 99% of people will say this is awful, but I get an aesthetic experience from it. So like, is that just something that like I've trained myself to do? Is there something objectively effective and aesthetically powerful in the created noise that these artists are putting forth? Like, is it objectively good or objectively bad? You know, or neither? Or like, is it all just purely subjective? And there's no objectivity in art. And I'm raising this as a question because I don't know.
Well, let's walk it back deterministically, right? Like, are you a student of music?
It's hard to define that. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I love music, and yes, my musical tastes have evolved. So
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes me a student, but maybe by some definition of student, we could say yes.
Yeah, but like you on average probably know more than the average person. Like you've spent hours like dissecting stuff. Like, you know, like I don't know if noise. Have you heard atonal music?
Sure. Yeah. Of course.
Yeah. So you know what atonal music is, and you know how to appreciate it, right? You know the appreciation of atonal music isn't in just the rhythmic Taylor Swiftian, like, oh, this is just poppy and I'm going to enjoy it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm guessing at somewhere you built up enough base of knowledge that you just weren't going to be impressed by your average pop music.
I don't know. That could be a piece of it, but I have no problem with pop music.
Yeah, well, you have no problem with it, but it doesn't turn you on intellectually, you know.
These are hard questions. I don't want to say yes because I'm not sure. I feel like saying yes would put me in a box too much. I don't feel comfortable fully agreeing, but I agree with this like approach that you're taking in principle. Like I agree with the sense that like my taste certainly evolved over the years due to influences, you know, like in a deterministic way. But like, yeah, I just think for most people, if they saw a noise concert, they'd be like, the emperor has no clothes, right? They'd be like, this is a joke. This is the guy's trolling you. You know what I'm saying? And people are paying money to be trolled.
Do they have many concerts, like active
Sure.
concerts?
Yeah, in New York City, when it was the scene that I was in, it was an amazing. Yeah, I mean, they were small. Some are larger than others. I think Merzbow sells a lot of tickets back in the day.
Did
But
you like the intimacy of it? Because
yeah,
I feel like
the intimacy
that convinces me. Yeah,
but
that gets
it
me
was
on board.
also you get lost, like you got transported, like you lost track of time. It's like meditative, and it just tapped into something very primitive, primal, and like Nietzschean, right, or Dionysian or something. I don't know. So this is just an analogy. I mean, we don't have to talk about music. I don't want to derail our conversation and start talking about like music, but like I don't know. To me, that raises questions. Like, so when here's how it plays out. So someone will say to me, like, okay, look at this artist, right? It's Rothko, Mark Rothko,
yeah,
right?
Yeah, the Rothko Chapel. Yeah.
Right. So people will say to me, they'll be like, this is clearly a joke. Like, clearly the emperor has no clothes. Like, clearly this is a scam. This is like a troll. It's a guy who just like did a solid color on a canvas and he's selling it. And my instinct is to say, I don't know if that's true. Like, just because I may or may not appreciate it, like, what does that mean? Like, people can appreciate random stuff that feels like not a lot of effort was put in according to your interpretation of it. Like, who knows if that's right or not? You know what I'm saying? So I have a lot more modesty when it comes to like assessing art in that respect.
Yeah. Well, I think modesty is what, keeps it interesting to you. Yeah, of course. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily even use the word modesty. Probably something just like curiosity, I guess.
Right. Or I don't trust my judgments,
Yeah.
so to speak.
Yeah.
So how does this play into your art and your artistic expression and appreciation? How do these questions affect what your writing or your thinking about art?
Well, I guess because there's a certain brand of writer that what they really want is just to make everyone happy, right? They want to please everyone. So the idea that there are some people who are just never going to get it, who are just never going to, like, whether or not that simply comes down to they were in a bad mood that day when they picked up your book, and there's a billion other books, so they're just like, yeah, I'm done, and like, I guess it's the impotence of that is a little it's not so hard to take once you've grappled with it. It's just that you begin to wonder if there is what is trying to be accomplished by making something good. Like, like if it just comes down to how someone is going to be feeling at the moment they interpret something, is anything good? Or have we just tricked ourselves that some stuff is better than others? There's a great quote from Milan Kundera I've been struggling with my whole adult life, and every time I say it, nobody has a good answer for me, and it's probably because there's no good answer, but it goes, Europe reduced Europe to 50 works of genius that it never understood. Just think of this outrageous metaphysical inequality. Class inequality pales in comparison to this metaphysical inequality, which turns some into the meaning of life and turns almost everyone else to the sands on the beach, right? So there's 50 great artists, your Beethovens, your Bachs, your Goethes, there's these great minds, and then everyone else below them was metaphysically zeros, right? Because they didn't have the greatness, and that's a problem, right? Metaphysically, it's even a deeper problem than the class problem, because metaphysically everyone feels like they have that spark of intelligence or artistic, or like people will throw around the word creative it's just like everyone is creative to some extent. It's just to the extent that they commit themselves to doing it, or like learning how to fail at it or whatever. So anyway, it's just one of these ideas that's always been tumbling around in the back of my head. I still don't really have a good grip on it. It's just bugs me.
That's very interesting. And to what extent is fame, sort of popular success the metric? Because I think for a lot of artists, even the successful ones, and I think certainly the non-successful ones, there's creation and creativity and popularity aren't necessarily aligned.
True.
Certainly the noise artists, as an example.
Yeah.
They're doing their own thing.
Yeah. I mean, by and large, artists in that vein, not interested in popularity, or just, like have a patron or are independently wealthy or whatever. So they can just completely work on it in their own time without.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, there's a whole economic side of things. Yeah, which is important to understand and think about for sure. You reminded me of another, I love what you said. I love that quote. I think it's a great quote. It reminds me of this excerpt from the biography of Sam Bankman-Fried. So I haven't read the biography of Sam Bankman-Fried that came out, whatever, few. I think it's called like Going Infinite or something like that. I read a quote though from the biography where Sam Bankman-Fried was saying that there's a 0% chance that Shakespeare was the greatest writer, because there's just been so many people since Shakespeare, like it's just impossible, like probabilistically, that he was the greatest one. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Which is like a funny thing. but I think it touches on like similar questions, like what does it mean to be the greatest? Like what does it mean to be metaphysically superior? And my instinct tells me is that like Sam Bankman-Fried is like reducing creativity to like IQ, right? If Sam Bankman, if the argument was about IQ, then there's no doubt that Shakespeare didn't have the highest IQ, obviously, because there's so many people and there's like a bell curve of IQ. But
Yeah.
Shakespeare's works are more than just IQ. They're in conversation with us. They like speak to themes that like may or may not be relevant to us. They speak to like a changing dynamics in his history, like his own historical evolution of the English language, like the evolution of society that may not have ever occurred again. You know what I'm saying? Like there could be historical factors and like thematic factors and resonances and echoes to the modern day that might not exist anywhere else. Like that is possible. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. Absolutely, that's possible. Also, I think his 0% chance thing is really stupid. Like 0% chance Shakespeare was the best writer? Okay, like I'll give you 5%, maybe, you know, like I mean, I think everyone has like a, you know, like I think Shakespeare, you know, just by his body of work alone should at least be a 5% chance he
Yeah,
was
that's
the best
fair.
writer.
That's fair.
I don't know. Maybe I got overly distracted by the 0% thing because no one should have ultimates in anything for that kind of speculation. I don't think.
Yeah. Yeah, the question of like I think pursuing, you know, a claim versus like pursuing I think what's internal to you as an artist and a creator, I think that's a really fruitful inquiry, you know what I'm saying? Um and I think there's a danger in pursuing mass appeal, right? Wouldn't you agree with that?
Yeah, of course, always. But it doesn't. I think there's also an incredible benefit in trying to do it as well because it's a very reactive way of living in the world because you have to be constantly aware of everyone.
Hmm.
Like it's like kind of a downside of humans at certain times. Like you know, there's like that Zimbardo study of if you're sitting in a room and smoke starts coming in the bottom of the door, but the other people in the room aren't doing anything, you're more than likely to not do anything because nobody else
Yeah.
is reacting.
Yeah.
You know, that kind of, and there's always like there's something always mass appealish about humans just as social creatures. So I think it's very helpful to reject striving for that, but it's also at the same time you have to let yourself allow for yourself to try and appeal to the most people, you know?
Hmm.
Like you can't, if you just say, well, I'm not, like for example with your noise music, like they're not saying, you know, don't come enjoy this if you don't like it, right? It's just saying you're going to have to do a certain amount of work internally before you get to the concert to enjoy it.
Hmm.
Like
Hmm.
you're going to have a little background of like putting yourself in the position to enjoy it. So yeah,
Yeah.
and
Yeah, I
then
like
like
that.
yeah, but you hate to put the onus on the audience, right?
Mm.
Like you hate to like, or at least a lot of modern art has gone that way of like saying like, well, we don't want to make it the audience's problem that they need to have some background knowledge before they appreciate it. But like David Foster Wallace would say, like you know you need that like in order for it to be great art because
Mhm.
you need to have to bring something to the table. Otherwise, it's not exploring anything new. Like
Yeah.
if you're not bringing anything to the piece you're exploring, you're not going to understand why it's interesting.
What
Yeah.
is the end point of no free will? So you and I we sound like we're pretty much in agreement. We both neither of us are enamored with the free will side of things. So the few questions are like we've already touched on some of these things, but I want to come back and I think they're very fruitful, like very rich questions, like in themes. Like so we if you embrace Sapolsky's perspective, how does that change your interacting with the world? How does that change your interactions with people? How does that change your interactions with yourself? Like what's the cost benefit, I guess, of like this no free will question? Like what are the implications?
I don't know. For me personally, I feel like it has almost no effect but that's because I was so willing to understand him already, I think. Now, if you're going to ask me to sort of continue in this kind of populist viewpoint, if it was, because by and large, let's make I mean, you can reject this if you want. I'm going to say a statement, by and large, your average person instinctively acts or thinks like they have free will, right?
Mhm.
That is what our whole society is based around. That's what our punishment system is based around. That's like what most justice is based around. Now, if we lived in a society where most people saw it through Sapolsky's lens, if they saw it through his eyes, how much would that change society if the majority tipped in that favor? I think that would be really fascinating. And I think that's where the idea of it is maybe more important than the practical application for me personally, other than just supporting it, other than being an advocate for the idea, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. I think to me, I guess if I were to maybe now I'm phrasing the question a little bit differently, but I guess to sort of, sort of build off what you're saying, like if I were to frame a practical difference between Sapolsky and Dennett, I think like the value and the validity of feelings like regret, for example, right? So in the past, I messed up. I mean, we all do. I certainly have. I look back, I have a sense of regret. Now, Sapolsky might come to me and he might say, that was all determined. So let go of regret, he might say. That's like a Sapolskyan perspective. And the Dennett perspective might be, no, we live in a world of this thing like similar to consciousness, an illusion of free will. And regret, he might say, is adaptive. Like it's an evolutionarily adaptive technique to like maybe make your future better. And you know what I'm saying? Like you don't have to shed regret if you don't want to. Like regret is part of life, and you can regret the past. And I feel like that's ultimately, there's like a psychological difference, about that's an example of how we relate to ourselves. And then of course the echo of that, the reflection of that is how we relate to other people. So Sapolsky would say a retributive kind of instinct or a judgment towards other people is misguided. And then it might give a similar thing like regret. Like we live in a world where like that's part of our world, what I'm saying? And that it's adaptive,
Yeah. Well, the compatibilist inside me says it's both, right? Like you work through like this stupid injury I gave myself. You work through all the details of how you got to where you are and that how something bad happened and like actively harmed you. And then you go, okay, well, I don't want that to happen again. So that's the purpose of why the regret happened in my brain. But then also, I do have to let it go. Because otherwise, I'm going to sit here and just chastise myself for forever. And that's completely worthless too. So, yeah. So I think it's natural to chastise, right? I think I mean, maybe there are some people who just completely blow through that and don't do it. I don't know the data on that. But I think the more beneficial thing to hear from somebody else is to say, let it go.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with that. I think that spiritually, psychologically, we benefit from letting go. And so another example is shame. I think all of us, human beings in general, shame is part of the human condition. And it's such a self-destructive emotion, I think, in general. And causes a lot of harm to ourselves and others. And like, I think fully embracing the Sapolskyan perspective, like fully embracing the determinists of our lives, can relax some of that and let a lot of that go and just accept more. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So I think there's a wisdom there.
Yeah. And that wisdom, as he's arguing, is backed up by science.
Yeah.
Right. It's like it's yeah, but it is a very spiritual, like, and it's wisdom that's been around forever. It's like an old Chinese proverb, It's like the man who blames somebody else hasn't even started. The man who blames himself is halfway there. The man who blames no one has already arrived. It's as old, it's fucking old as time.
Totally. I love that. Okay. Wrapping up here. What can you share? What are you reading these days? What do you think about these days? What's been on your mind? What's an interesting what can you share with us about what you've been working on or thinking about or anything.
Well, I well, you know, there's the trying to write screenplay stuff, which is always real fun, not having an agent or anything.
Mm.
But I wrote a thing about universal basic income, and to go back to something Dennett says in the debate they had, which really got under my skin, which like just like every time I hear it, it just really irks me. Is he had a moment where he was criticizing Sapolsky as a thing in his book, talking about the gardener at Stanford.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, you make a big deal in your book about the gardener at Stanford, whom you see dutifully trimming up around the edges while you're at some commencement ceremony. But I dare say he's an honest man. He's a responsible man. You don't know whether he's thrilled to death to be able to, perhaps bring his family from somewhere, in South America where he was in great difficulties, and now he's in the United States. He's got a job. He's taking care of his family, and he's proud to be an honest man, and he's proud to deserve the salary that Stanford pays him. There are lots of people like that.
And like whenever someone says that, they're like, well, maybe he likes being a gardener. It's like, oh my, I just start going insane because I'm like, that's not the point. Like, no one's arguing for someone who enjoys being a gardener, not being a gardener. The point is someone who is forced to be a gardener because they have no other choice in that society. And like, I have had so many crappy jobs, so many instances where someone has told me, like, this is what I want you to do. It's just something in their head. It's completely arbitrary. Like it doesn't necessarily do anything good. It doesn't help anything. It's just some idea, some visual or aesthetic component that they've just decided is worthwhile. And like like it just irks me because I'm like, it's anybody who wants to be a gardener can still be a gardener. It's about the person who's has to be one because they have no other choice. Is like, and I just hate it when people use that rationale, and especially someone like Dennett. It's like, it's so unempathetic, because Sapolsky, yeah, it's like it's not that he's wrong. Of course, there are people who enjoy doing that work, but anyway,
Yeah. I hear you. I think they have a very small and narrow philosophical debate, but they have a very large political debate. They disagree about inequality in society, and then one becomes like a proxy for the other. But it's not so clear that that it's actually a good proxy for the other. Like you could be a compatibilist like Dennett, but also be more concerned about inequality. You know what I'm saying? Like, and you could be a hard determinist and also be very unconcerned about inequality because you're a very hard determinist, and you got to make sure people don't park on the wrong side of the road, so you put them in jail for 10 years. Like, what I'm saying? Like, so like there's like a loose connection between the philosophy and the politics, but like the philosophy is a proxy for the politics. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really good way of summing it up. Even though I'd like to keep talking, I'm happy to keep talking. That's a really good way of summing it up. It is really about moral politics at the end of the day, kind of, and that's what makes it such a sticky debate in my mind, at least.
Yeah.
And that's why I kind of keep trying to find Dennett's side more, and but I just have a hard time. I have a hard time when I hear someone like Sapolsky talk about it. I'm like, I don't know what Dennett is arguing against, really. Like you're saying, it's kind of like a political debate where they're just talking past each other. It's like, this is my general sense of how I view reality, and this is his general sense. And it doesn't mesh. Like, even though they're so damn close, the narcissism of small differences. They're both incredibly intelligent academics. Like, they're so close to understanding each other, and yet they miss. And maybe that for me is the most confounding thing about it. Like, how can they not find some point of agreement?
Totally. Yeah, I think there's a lesson there. There's a lesson there. Like exactly you said, I'm repeating back what you said to me and I heard from you. But like, they're so smart. They're both academics. They have a life of book writing and talking. and they can't understand each other. It's like a little bit wild. It's a little bit crazy, right? And some of it's probably the format, like it was set up like a debate with a moderator with like 10 minutes, 10, and maybe in that format, you're not like primed to be empathetic. You're not primed to like listen well, but I'm happy to just put a lot of blame on Sapolsky because like, I think Sapolsky calls out Dennett in his book, but like Sapolsky doesn't do the work of like actually trying to understand where Dennett is coming from. You know what I'm saying? Like, for example, like, and you could say it's not his job. Sapolsky, he's writing his book and he quotes Dennett and he says this is an example of, like it's all fair game, it's all fine. But like, it is sad that like that they so talk past each other. I think that's a little sad. And they're both like so interesting and respectable and smart.
But at the end, Sapolsky goes, this was fun.
Yeah. I think Dennett was more bitter. In other interviews I saw with Dennett, he seems like pretty bitter at Sapolsky. But whatever.
Yeah, he does seem.
He got testy. He got like really mean during like some of their debates. He was like, obviously you had no choice but to misquote me because you're a determinist.
Yeah, no,
like
that's
that.
kind of when he lost, right?
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
He lost in that moment when he got defensive like that, and he spent a long time on it too.
Yeah.
He spent like 5 of his minutes like just refuting that he didn't understand.
Yeah. This was a tremendous amount of fun. We should definitely do it again. We should keep this going. I'm happy to make this like a regular thing.
All right, let's do our best. We'll just have to keep coming up with incredibly interesting debates that are about the history of humanity to talk about every time.